Here's a scenario. You just played one e4, your opponent plays knight to f6, and they're suddenly in an Alekhine Defence and you don't know what to do. Well, I've got a new novelty for you, brought to you by Emory Tate in 1991. Quite an interesting novelty he played in this game. So Tate is white, and after knight to f6 he played the move e5. Black played knight to d5. White played pawn to c4, hitting the knight, and knight to b6 was played. This is all traditional stuff. White played pawn to a4, threatening to play pawn to a5 and try and trap the knight. So in this position, black always plays a5, or they should do, or they'll lose the game. And this is where the novelty from Emory Tate comes in. Rook to a3. A bizarre looking move, but the idea is just to swing it across the board to join in the kingside attack. And it looks absolutely insane, but it's actually quite decent. In this game, black decided to continue with the move knight to c6, attacking the pawn on e5, so Emory defends it. It plays d4, defends the pawn, and black just goes on with the traditional move d6. And here most players actually tend to take the pawn on d6, but here Tate played a very interesting novelty as well. Pawn to e6. The point is, if bishop takes e6, we'll fork the bishop and knight at the same time and pick up a free piece. So after e6, black is forced to take with the pawn. Pawn takes e6, but this opens up the king on the white squares. Got all these squares surrounding the king. And for this reason, white now swung his rook across, rook to g3, preparing to attack around this area of the board. And already we get a very unusual and weird position. If someone was going to walk past your board when you play this, they'll probably wonder what you're doing. So black could play a normal move here, like g6 for instance. If they play pawn to g6, white has h4. And the idea is simple, just to simply attack the pawn with h5, and black's king is very weak. In this game though, black played the move e5, which is actually the recommended computer move as well. Tate played d5, hitting the knight. He's forced it to jump in to the best square, knight to d4, so black does have a very nice centralised knight. Tate decides to try and get rid of it though with bishop to e3, but black counters here with bishop to f5, threatening to play moves like knight to c2. For this reason, white develops rapidly with bishop to d3, blunting this bishop. So black now defends their bishop with queen to d7, also developing at the same time. And there's a trade on d4. White takes the centralised knight off the board, black recaptures, and white continues rapid development, knight to e2. Notice white isn't trading, he's just going after the pawns. Black takes on d3, queen takes d3, and black tries to pick up a free pawn with queen takes a4. And now this is a very double-edged position. It's not very sound for white, let's be honest, but it's going to get interesting. White played the move b3, so attacks the queen, defends the pawn at the same time. Black throws in a check, and white plays knight to d2, developing their knight. And in this position, black played the move a4. I think that's a very human move, because what black wants to do is just roll his pawn down the board. However, according to the computer, g6 is actually really good for black, because after queen takes d4, rook to g8, there's moves like bishop to g7 coming in, and black is actually doing fairly decently. After a4 though, white could have taken knight takes d4, and after a3, castles and a2, white's just in the nick of time with this move knight to c2, hitting the queen at the same, and hitting the queen and saving the game, saving the a1 square from promoting here. After a4 though, Tate decided to take on a4, and then came rook takes. So now c4 is under massive pressure. But I don't think Tate really cares about that. He just castled kingside here. I think after knight takes c4, after takes, and queen f5, actually we see that the white squares are being dominated. And if queen takes e2 is queen c8, and probably actually maybe a repetition in this position. forcing black to take, and it's a very double-edged position, but also looks like it's going to be a perpetual. In the game, actually, black decided to play rook to a2 to continue their advantage a different way. So hitting the knight twice. Tate defended his knight, the queen went to a4, hitting the rook. So rook c1 was played, moving the rook away, defending the c-pawn, and now rook to a1. So black's trying to put some pressure against this king on the back rank, but Tate plays a nifty move, knight to b1, stopping any trades of the rook. However, knight b1 actually, again, isn't the computer recommended move, because g6 is actually really good for black, weirdly enough. This is quite a computerish variation though, because after queen takes d4, rook g8, the point is now the bishop can either come to g7 or h6. If it comes to h6, it's hitting the rook. If it comes to g7, it's hitting the queen. So let's, for instance, say queen e4 here. There comes bishop to h6, hitting the rook, and once the rook moves away, then the point is now the c4 pawn can be taken, and the computer just thinks black is better. So a little bit of a miss for black. Instead they played queen to b4, a very human looking move though, because he's still threatening c4 and putting pressure on this knight on b1. But now comes knight takes d4 from white. Knight takes c4. It looks really good, like an interesting move. The point is, I think, if rook takes knight, then obviously queen takes knight will be checkmate, due to the threat on the back rank. Now in this position, white could have actually played a very nice move, queen to d1, with threats against the king coming in, but also threatening this move, knight to c2 to fault the rook and the queen at the same time. If queen to a4, knight c2 would have worked because it hits the rook, and unfortunately for black, once the rook moves away, there's also this other fork, knight c3, very tricky position. Black will probably be forced to move the queen away and lose the rook. But in the game after knight takes c4, Tate found a different move. He played knight to e6. I've got the feeling maybe this game might have been in a bit of time trouble. Black played c5, white plays d takes pawn, en passant, black recaptures, and now Tate does find the move, queen to d1. Playing queen d1 also allows his rook to swing across to b3. In the game, black continued king to d7, and look at the eval bar, sweep all the way up for white. Not a good move at all. In fact, black should just play a solid move like d5, because if rook b3 now, then comes queen to d6, and you're attacking the knight and also defending this key b8 square at the same time. Unfortunately, king to d7 though just doesn't gut it. Tate just played rook to b3, hits the queen, but also once the queen moves, now it's infiltrating. But actually, white found a really good sequence. So queen to a5, and now the excellent move, queen to g4. The point is now, this king is getting x-rayed, and the only square it can actually go to move out of the discovered check is king to e8. But then white can just play queen takes knight and is a full piece up. So in the game, black has to play knight to e5. It saves the knight on c4 and also hits the queen at the same time. You might think that white will be forced to move the queen backwards, but instead there's a discovered double check. Knight to c5, check, queen check, the king is forced to move somewhere. If king to e8, then rook b8 check will be played, king f7, and queen to e6 is checkmate. So instead black played king to c7, but now Tate played rook to b7 check, king to d8, played rook to b8, and after king c7, the only move, queen c8 is now checkmate, and after that double-edged game, white comes out victorious. So going back to the starting position, if you're in the business of finding a good opening against the Alekhine, why not try pawn to e5, knight to d5, and this variation with c4, knight b6, a4. Black will most likely always play a5, but then now you can play the secret weapon, rook to a3. So get studying and see what you can do with this opening. Let me know in the comments how you get on. Alright, see you next time.